Okay, we're continuing with quotes from this book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're going to be talking about Johann Fichte. He's a German, but we have to show a picture of Napoleon first because we're going to talk about the German school system, the Prussian school system, and it came in response to their defeat by Napoleon in the Battle of Jena in, I think it was 1806. Okay, so Napoleon was a military genius, and they kicked the Germans' butt, the Prussians' butt. And Germany was very upset about it. This should not happen. They saw themselves as the great soldiers. They saw themselves as the men who had prevented the Roman Empire from expanding east. And, the great Arminius had defeated the Romans. Okay, so they decided they had to change their entire school system to be able to train more obedient men. They felt that they did not have enough discipline. So the Prussian school system was designed to set men up to be completely obedient like robots and do whatever they were commanded to do. And so Fichte was one of these guys. Johann Fichte, a German or Prussian you could call him, was interested in how can we design our school system so that they will always obey. They will have no individualism, no ideas of their own. So listen to what he has to say. There are two great classes of men, the people and the scholars, the men of science. For the former, nothing exists but that which directly leads to action. It is for the latter to see beyond. They are free to be artists, to create the future and the history. They are the conscious architects of the world. The higher classes constitute the mind of a single large whole of humanity. The lower classes constitute the limbs. The former are the thinking and the designing part. The latter are the carrying out the work part. So basically what he felt was the aristocrats were the only ones capable of any sophisticated thinking, and they should do all the thinking. Everyone else should just shut up and obey and follow orders. And by the way, that's very common that aristocrats think that way in a lot of countries. And so be aware of that, okay? Most likely they don't consider you an aristocrat, whoever you are. Okay, Fichte continues. Education should be aimed at destroying free will, so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. The schools must fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will. Okay, so the relevance of the Prussian school system is the United States school system was designed based on this. They went to Germany and said, gee, they're really training these people pretty well. We should copy them. And that's back when the United States school system was at its best. At least they still studied the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, the Bible, and all that kind of stuff. And then it sort of drifted away from that. There were some arguments between the Protestants and the Catholics about which version of the Bible, what aspect of the religion to teach. But it's drifted farther and farther away from that. They no longer teach the ancient Greeks. They no longer teach the ancient Romans, the Bible. They learn almost nothing about the Renaissance. And so the level of education in this country is severely deteriorated. And then there's all kinds of other things that come into it. The look-say method rather than phonetics for teaching reading. Phonetics is so much better. It's not even funny. Look-say creates dyslexics. So anyways, the school program has really degenerated, and it's carrying off into all of society. We're becoming a dumbed-down idiocracy society, and people are obsessed with their cell phones rather than reading books or learning stuff. And it has consequences because, as they had said, the original founders, you can only have a free people if the people are well-informed and well-educated and speak freely and think freely. And then once you lose that, forget about it. No ruler person ever wants a free country. They always want a bunch of slaves. If you look through history, that's pretty much how it almost always is. There's a few unique exceptions to that, like the ancient Greeks. But they still had slaves, but at least they had an aristocracy where freedom is allowed. A lot of places, there's not even an aristocracy. There's just one guy at the top, like the Roman emperor or something. Okay, well, that's enough about that. We'll talk about school some other time. Johann Fichte, the Prussian. Okay, now we're going to talk briefly about Marsilio Ficino. He lived from 1433 to 1499. And he was living in Italy at the time of Cosimo Medici, the great Cosimo, sort of the beginner, one of the pioneers in beginning the Italian Renaissance. The Medicis had a lot of money. They sort of managed the bank for the Vatican. In those days, usury was seen as a sin, and they wanted to make up for it by donating a lot of money for the public benefit. And they did. They built a lot of schools, educational institutions, and did a lot of other good things. commissioned a lot of beautiful art. And one of the things they did is they set up a Greek academy of learning. I'll just tell you a few things. Here it is. So Marsilio, when he was 6 years old, his father, who was a doctor of Cosimo Medici, they knew that the boy was very bright, and they said to him, someday when you grow up, you will translate these books, these works of Plato, and reveal their secrets to the world. In the 1400s, the new books had come over from Constantinople because the fall of the Byzantine Empire of the Catholics, and they sort of were being absorbed into Italy. And these books were just pouring into Italy, and it brought the new works of Plato. Ficino had started a Platonic Academy in Florence, and this was, of course, funded by the Medicis. And here's a book by Arthur Herman, wrote that great book, The Cave and the Light, mostly about the contrast between Plato and Aristotle and their influence on subsequent Western civilization. So here's Arthur Herman. What Ficino proved was that there was no real clash between Christian and pagan systems of theology. Yeah, Catholicism is really good at absorbing. It's very syncretic, meaning that it can absorb what it learns from other cultures, and that's a very good thing. That makes it stronger and better. Okay, a ton of stuff valuable was learned from the ancient Greeks. Not so much from the Romans, but still some valuable stuff from the Romans, like from Cicero, for example. Okay, Will Durant. Ficino tried to show the connection between paganism and Christianity. He came to the conclusion that God is the soul of the world. Okay, whatever that means. Ficino. Aristotle's genius is purely human, but Plato's is both human and divine. Okay, so now you're starting to get off into a little bit of sidetracks, but the relevance is there's some people like Nietzsche who said Christianity is basically Platonism for the masses. Okay. What Ficino had proved, or at least seemed to prove, okay, all right, we already got to that. In the end, Christianity and paganism arose from the same source. There's some truth to that. The New Testament was written in ancient Greek. Okay, it was written in Greek. All right, there is a tremendous, St. Paul went to the Athens to speak on the Acropolis at the Areopagus about Christianity. Okay, it goes hand in hand with ancient Greece, much more than people realize. And Catholicism has more in common with the ancient Greeks than Protestantism. Protestantism's, sort of sola fide, sola biblia, sola gratia, and what they're basically saying is only by the Bible. But that's partly why Protestantism is so bleak, whereas the attitude of Catholicism is, look, the Catholic Church was around for hundreds of years before the Bible was consolidated, and its traditions and whatnot are relevant as well. It goes back to the founder, Jesus Christo and St. Peter. Okay, that's relevant, and I would say, having spent a long time studying religion, Catholicism orders a much better way of life than Protestantism. Protestantism is bleak. It gives too much power to the seculars, and the seculars usually take it over, and it becomes a joke, or it bifurcates into a bunch of different sects. The Catholic Church is still there. The Catholic Church currently has been taken over by bad, evil men that are destroying it from inside on purpose. Okay, the current Pope is an Antichrist. But be that as it may, the Catholic Church is still good. It would actually be nice if America had a Catholic Church separate from the Pope. They used to have such a thing. They'd call it cisalpine, meaning, we're Catholics, but we're just not ruled by the Pope. Okay, because, if you have a good Pope, it could be okay. But if you have a bad Pope, it's not okay. And the current Pope is no good. Okay, I got a little more on Marsilio Ficino. Okay, so here is a description of his life by Will Durant. Marsilio Ficino. Medici Florence had the greatest concentration of art and scholarly talent, artistic and scholarly talent since Periclean Athens. Yep, that's true. Marsilio Ficino, physician-philosopher, was one of the many scholars and artists funded by the Medicis. They also funded Michelangelo and a lot of Pico della Mirandola, a lot of really bright people, Raphael. Ficino was a philosophic and religious advisor to Michelangelo and Raphael. How would you like to be the advisor to those guys? Look at the painting behind me, the School of Athens, magnificent, okay? He helped advise for that. Ficino spent most of his life translating Greek books into Latin. Ficino burned candles in front of a bust of Plato. Although Ficino was also a Catholic priest, he felt that Socrates and Plato had expounded a monotheistic faith as noble as Christianity. Okay, so Plato was a bit of a mystic, and Plato was obviously a genius, and Alfred North Whitehead had said all of Western philosophy is basically a footnote to Plato. But Plato was overly influenced by Sparta because Sparta had defeated Athens, in the Peloponnesian War. And because of that, he was a little bit collectivist. He was big on eugenics. He felt the best man should be bred to the best woman to make the best soldier, the best scholar, and all this type of stuff. He wanted the place ruled by philosopher kings. So Plato was not, and he believed in the noble lie, meaning that you have to tell the peasants, something that's not true just to get them to behave. So Aristotle, I like Aristotle much better. Aristotle is a big pioneer of individualism and self-development and give people a chance to develop and see where things go. But anyways, I just wanted to introduce you to that concept of the Medici's funding the scholars that led to the Italian Renaissance, okay? Michelangelo lived with the Medicis, okay? They also then, of course, helped fund the teaching for Raphael, etc. And so I wish, the modern world could have some type of new renaissance, okay? And what it takes is that people have to appreciate good art, literature, thought, philosophy, science, and scholarship. In order to have excellence, you have to have meritocracy. You can't have excellence when you don't believe in excellence and you say excellence is BS. There is such a thing. Anybody can look at a great painting and see it's great, okay? And unless you can do that, all this modern art stuff is fake nonsense. Unless, imagine a Renaissance artistic scholar goes from the Vatican where he sees Michelangelo and Raphael and he comes to see our modern art museums. He goes, what is this? A sick kind of joke. So anyways, there it is.